Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Zayin. We are at the bottom of Kuf Vav Amid. We are the last word on the fifth to last line, and we are trying to find a source for the prohibition of slaughtering sacrifices outside the Beis Hamikdash. We know, because the Torah says so, that there is a punishment of kares. The question is, kares often goes along with malchus, with lashes. And the question is, would one get on some level? The question that the Gemara is dealing with is, would one get lashes? And in order to get a punishment from a court, we have a general principle that in addition to being told about the punishment, we need to also be told about we also need to have an explicit prohibition as well. And there isn't one associated with slaughtering sacrifices outside the Beis Hamikdash. There's only the verse that talks about kares. And so Abaye suggested that we derive the quote unquote warning associated by using a Kal V'chomer. And the Kal V'chomer that he suggested was that if one set aside an offering when bamot were legal, and now bamot become illegal, it is prohibited to slaughter that animal outside the Beis Hamikdash, even though it's not going to be subject to kares. And so, if you were to do the same thing to slaughter an animal that was sanctified for a sacrifice when bamot are illegal, and therefore you're going to get kares, well, then kal v'chomer, it should also be illegal. And so, as a result, the prohibition that is understood to be covering the situation where one shechted an animal that had originally been set aside for a bama, and now instead the bamas are no longer allowed, and one went ahead and anyway sacrificed it. That prohibition should also cover us and serve as the warning associated with the prohibition, the general, more general and more broadly applicable prohibition of sacrificing of slaughtering a sacrifice outside the Beit Hamikdash. So, but the Gemara now asks
So
again,
what
fifth.
was the source of of the the Chomer on which we're basing that Kal V'chomer? What was the pasuk that supported that source?
What was the
Uh,
pasuk that supported that source?
supported, I mean,
I don't remember the pasuk off the top of my head. Let me
but I mean, is
find
there a
it.
pasuk that supports the greater illegality, the prohibition to do it even when there is a when there's no Baman, it has to be done in the
Yeah,
Beit
that
Hamikdash?
the Gemara didn't cite it. The Gemara did not cite it. It just stated the fact that it was the case. Um,
I don't remember that from the
Fine, yes.
previous. If there's
Could
but
go.
if there was cited, yesterday I
Yeah,
didn't
I mean,
cited that.
Rashi does not give us the relevant Rashi is makom shelo onash is and it just says kagon bekudshim shehikdishan b'shas heter. So it's Rashi one, two, three, 4, 5 lines down, last word on the line, and then the sixth line and the beginning of the seventh line. That it does not. We don't. The Gemara does not quote a pasuk. It's just understood that if you were to have a sacrifice that it was uh, that was set aside, that was consecrated when bamot were permitted, and then slaughtered outside the Mishkan after the prohibition went into effect, that there's a negative prohibition. It could be that it's even the same pasuk that we're dealing with, but it does not explicitly say what pasuk It is. Now, it could be that the Gemara would eventually get to that question, but right now we're basically saying, we're not even going to get to that question because the Gemara is asking at the end of the fifth to last line on Kuvav Mabet, V'chi mazhirin min hadin, do we use a logical argument, a Kal v'chomer type argument, in order to provide the warning associated with a punishment in the Torah? Do we do that kind of warning with logic? We don't. Afilu man amar onshin minadin. There's a whole debate as to whether we can derive the punishment for some sin based on a logical inference. And so, but ein mazhirin minadin. Even the people who say that you can do a punishment based on logic, you're not going to use logic in order to create a prohibition. And so as a result, even if we could find a pasuk, so, again, the Gemara never says what the pasuk is, to my recollection, and it certainly doesn't have any here in the notes either. So it doesn't specifically say that. So even if it did, it would be able to respond that, hey, that doesn't work because of logic. But it could be that we're coming to this and saying there's no logic, and so even though we never got the chance to ask what's the pasuk, the bottom line is that even if there was a pasuk, it wouldn't work. And so now we've already offered 3 attempts at trying to determine what the source is for the prohibition that would serve as a warning, and we come now to a 4th. Ella kid Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is going to come to the rescue, and he's going to offer a potential solution. And what does he say? Asya hava da'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Asya hava hava. That he says that we have a gzeira shava of the word bringing. We have the word bringing. Rashi tells us, last Rashi on the daf, Asya hava hava shchita miha'ala, that we learn from the prohibition of bringing up a sacrifice. We're going to use that as the coverage for slaughtering the sacrifice. So we learn shchita from ha'ala, from bringing up. So ksiv b'shchita lo heviyu. The pasuk says, this is Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin pasuk Dalid. It says the El Pesach Oho Moed Lo Heviu, that the person who's going to slaughter it did not bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Ohel Moed, namely the Mishkan in the Torah and the Beis Hamikdash in post the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. And then when it comes to, and again, it says heviu, that's a bringing verb. And similarly, when it comes a few psukim later in pasuk tet, it says the el pes, and now comes back into Rashi, v'ksiv b'ha'ala, and when it comes to not bringing the sacrifice, not putting it up on an altar, lo yevienu, it says, he will not bring. The El Pesach Ohel Moed Lo Yevienu, he's not going to bring it. So the bottom line is, Ugze, and back in Rashi, Lo Ugze Rashava, and we have Ugze Rashava. Hoel Umufna, and since Umufnahi, and since these words are not used to teach us anything, and they are not necessary. Lekach harehi kemisha mefarish ba. So as a result, it's as if there was an explicit thing. Ve'ein zeh min hadin, and this is not considered a logical deduction. Kekal v'chomer she'adam dan ma'atzmo, because a kal v'chomer, we determine the logic on our own, and whereas a gzeira shava needs to have a tradition that's associated with it, and we have this tradition, and so as a result, that this tradition of this gzeira shava is going to teach us the prohibition of slaughtering an animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. Mala hala, and back into the Gemara.
So this is mufna. We're saying that it can be used because it's not used for anything else.
Correct. It's mufna. Exactly. It's free. So mala, and so back into the Gemara. So second to last line, fourth to last word on the line. Malahalan lo anash ella im kain hizir. So just as in connection with offering a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash, the Torah doesn't punish without having a prohibition, meaning it's got a negative commandment that serves as a warning. Avkan lo anash alim kain hizir. So too, we're going to say that even though there's no explicit verse, we're going to have the Gzera Shava serve as the effective warning. So Rava offers a fifth answer and a second approach that could work. So Rabbi Yonah, he says it's like Rabbi Yonah, Da'am Rabbi Yonah, Asya Sham. You know what? We have the word there is twice in the pasuk, and it connects the two concepts. Let's take a look at the top. Rashi, to Amar Rabbi Yonah, Amar Kra, Sham ta'aleh olosecha v'sham ta'aseh. So Rashi already in the Divrei HaMaskil effectively incorporates the relevant words of the pasuk to highlight the point that the first Sham is referring to Ta'aleh Olosecha. There in the Beis Hamikdash, that's where you're going to offer the offerings. Visham Tazeh, and that's where you're going to do all of the actions that are associated with it, including slaughtering the animal. So Rashi continues, Itke Shar Asiyos, so the Torah has connected. This is a hekesh rather than a gzera shava. Even though the language of asya sham is often the kind of language that in fact, it's a similar language to the prior answer where it was a gzera shava. But here, it's not actually a gzera shava, it's a hekesh. The two topics are connected because they're both dealt with in the same pasuk, and so we've connected iske shar asiyos lahala, that we've connected other kinds of actions to ha'ala, to actually the offering, putting the sacrifice on the altar. Ma ha'ala lo anash ella im kain hizir. Just as when it comes to ha'ala, the Torah is not going to punish without actually having a warning, and there is an explicit prohibition. Av shchita, so too shchita. We're going to treat this hekesh as if we're going to move the warning that was associated to ha'ala and also apply it to other types of actions, including shchita. Lo anash ella im kain hizir. Torah is not going to give us the punishment unless there is a warning. So again, Rashi has forecasted the language of the Gemara. So so now picking up on second line.
Isn't this a stretch? In first we try with a Gezerah Shava, and now with a Hekesh, when we don't have a pasuk, and now we're
Correct.
trying to.
No,
That's not usual.
The Torah doesn't always tell us everything, and the rabbis have the various methods, as we say every day. The Shlosha Sar Midos Shatorah Nidreshes Behen. Obviously there are other lists as well, but the 13 which is what we list every morning. The idea is that creates a similar biblical obligation. The Gzera Shava is like the Torah saying it. A Hekesh is like the Torah saying it. And so the Gemara continues, second line, third word on the line. Malahalon lo anash elim kain hizkir, avkan lo anash elim kain hizkir. Both cases, we're going to treat it as if there is an actual warning. So ashkechan muktrei fnim l'shehelan l'chutz. All right, so you have now shown to me that if you have a sacrifice that could be burned, muktere fanim, it's theoretically possible that it would be burned on the inside. How come would it be burned on the inside? Because it was slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash. Remember, in our Mishnah, we had a debate about whether or not something that was slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash, does it also have the prohibition? And the Tanakama says yes, and the other opinion we had in our Mishnah said no, and we'll get to that momentarily. But now we're focused on the yes opinion, and says ashkechan muktari fanim shehel an lechut. So we see that if in fact you have a sacrifice that could have been burned inside, namely it was slaughtered inside. Mukdere chutz shehel an chutz minayin. How do I know? Meaning the Gemara has concluded, notwithstanding your concerns, Kenneth, that in fact we've come up with now two valid approaches to show that in fact this has been warned against, and therefore we have both a warning and a punishment, and we're going to therefore give lashes, and the person would be subject to kares. So minayin, how do I know that if in fact you slaughtered the animal outside the base of Mikdash, and so as a result it cannot be brought inside the base of Mikdash any longer? Was never kosher to be brought inside. How do I know that in fact that is also going to result in liability in the prohibition of kares and therefore of lashes? So Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Kra, the Torah tells us the Aleihem Tomar this pasuk. Aleihem Tomar is al hasmuchin tomar. It's going to be on what is nearby. So as Rashi tells us, so take a well, let's take first. Let's do a couple of Rashi. So one, two, three, four lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Muktre chutz, shchute chutz. So when we say muktere chutz, we mean an animal that has been dedicated for the base of Mikdash, has been dedicated as a sacrifice, and is now slaughtered outside the base of Mikdash, and therefore cannot be burned inside the base of Mikdash, cannot go on the altar. And so that's what we're talking about. Va'aleihem tomar, and the pasuk says that with respect to them and to them you shall say. And so the question is zehu tchilas parshas ha'ala. This is the beginning of the Torah's discussion of the prohibition of bringing up a sacrifice outside the Beit HaMikdash. Usmuchin leparsha shchutei chutz, and it's right next to and juxtaposed with the parsha of slaughtering an animal outside the base of Mikdash. So al harishonim, so demishtoe b'shchutei chutz she'amar she'im ha'ala b'chutz chayiv alehem karinan. So just as when it comes to shchutei chutz, obviously we're slaughtering the animal outside the base of Mikdash. And now it seems as if we can say that this juxtaposition is telling us that when we say that you're not also supposed to bring the animal up, it's also applying to an animal that was outside. You're not supposed to bring an animal as a sacrifice outside the base of Mikdash. It's also referring to an animal that was slaughtered outside the base of Mikdash. So that is the suggestion that Rav Kahana offers. And but the Gemara asks, Maskiflo Rava in particular asks, Miksiv ve'aleihem with an ayin. Does it say on them? No, ve'aleihem ksiv. It's to them. It has no. The word aleihem would thereby connect you to the prior topic. Aleihem is effectively connecting you to is about the people to whom it's being told. You can't, just make up a homonym and say that, okay, we're going to apply a homonym and therefore it's going to connect the two topics. So as a result, we come up with two other answers for us. Ella Kiditana de Be Rabbi Yishmael. It's like Rabbi Yishmael, the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael said, V'aleihem tomar, v'aleihem tomar, v'aleihem tomar. The vav is connecting la'arev parshios. The vav connects us, as Rashi says, two Rashis down. Vav Mosif al Inyan Rishon. The vav connects and adds to the prior topic. Uma'arav parshias, and now that's how we can connect the two parshias. So obviously Rav Kahana had the right idea of connecting those two parshias, but he had the wrong concept as to how it would happen. That even something that was slaughtered outside, and now you brought it up, that would also be subject to the penalty. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Asya hava. No, you know what? There's a gzeira shava. Malahalan mekutre chutz, af kan mekutre chutz. It's the same Zerah that we had before, but it effectively goes in the other direction. That before we use the Zerah to tell us that slaughtering has a warning, and now slaughtering outside the base of Mikdash has a warning, and now we're using that Zerah to tell us that actually it not only does it have a warning, but it also teaches about the prohibition of bringing up, to say that even when you slaughter the animal outside, it still has the prohibition of bringing up the sacrifice. So Maskefla Rav Bivi asks, Haditanan, but 1 second, we have a Mishnah that says the following: Shloshim Vishesh Kresos B'Torah. There are 36 references to kares in the Torah. It says this is a Mishnah in, not surprisingly, Mesechas Krisos. This is the opening Mishnah in Mesechas Krisos. Tulosin Vishav Havayan. But there should be 37 because we have both now bringing up a sacrifice that was slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash, if you bring it up outside the Beis Hamikdash, and we have bringing up outside the Beis Hamikdash an animal that was slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash, because we have a separate drasha to teach it, not and we're not just learning it from one pasuk. And so as a result, it should be 37. De'ika hamala v'hamala. There are two kinds of offerings: offering it when it's slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash, and offering when it's slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash. So kasha, yeah, it actually is a little difficult. Now, it's interesting because here, take a look at Tosos, the third Tosos on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. De'ika hamala v'hamala kasha. Kasha, it's a little bit hard. Mehadalo Mishani. Why didn't we just answer Hahi decreases Rabbi Yossi Aglili de Pater Mukutrei Chutz? Because Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that's the opinion that I couldn't remember whose name it was. That's the opinion in our Mishnah that says that in fact, if you were to slaughter the animal outside the Beis Hamikdash, it's not subject to the prohibition of kares, and it's not subject to the prohibition of bringing it outside the Beis Hamikdash, because that is it's already a non-kosher animal, and it could not be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. And so, as a result, that is a potential answer, and maybe that's why it's only a kasha and not a tiyuvta. And in the end, the last two answers both stand, and in fact, that's the basis that the rabbis in our Mishnah would say, the Tanakama in our Mishnah would say, that in fact Hamala is in fact two different prohibitions. There's a prohibition of bringing up outside the Beis Hamikdash an animal that was slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash, and there's a prohibition of bringing up outside the Beis Hamikdash an animal that was slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash. So 1 second. So now we're going
Where are they
to
bringing that? If it's slaughtered inside, you said you're bringing it up. Where are they bringing it up?
on a foreign altar, on a non-Beis Hamikdash altar. We're going to get to what kind of altar it needs to be very shortly. Maybe that's tomorrow, but we're going to be discussing that. But bottom line is, you made an altar. Maybe it's even a leftover bama from when bamot were kosher, and now you take it to that bama and you bring it up and you put a fire on it and you burn it outside the Beis Hamikdash. That's the prohibition of ha'ala. That's what we're talking about.
But weren't there certain things with that we had to burn outside the Beit HaMikdash?
Yes, there are absolutely things that you have to burn. Specifically, a number of the chatas panimios that we've seen need to be burned outside the Beis Hamikdash. But what we're talking about is a situation where the Torah did not tell us to burn it outside the Beis Hamikdash. The Torah told us that these sacrifices are supposed to be burned and brought inside the Beis Hamikdash, and somebody has brought it outside the Beis Hamikdash, notwithstanding the fact that they're supposed to bring it inside. You're absolutely right that obviously we're not talking about any of the sacrifices that are supposed to be burned outside the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, the Haditanan. Now, having determined the Torah sources for the laws discussed in our Mishnah, the Gemara is now going to seek the source for a law that is taught in the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph. And so we're going to say, Hazorik mitzvahs damim b'chutz chayiv, if you throw part of the blood outside of the Beis Hamikdash, so then you're going to be liable. So minalan, how do I know that? Meaning we're highlighting all the prohibitions of the things that you're and providing sources for all the for the slaughtering and the burning. So now we're going to say, okay, well you've given two of the items. Let's go through the rest. So what is it? What's the source there? So nafgale miditanya. That's going to be give us the proof of that is going. The source of that is going to be as detailed in the following brisa. Dam yechashev. The blood should be considered. It should be considered as blood. So this pasuk is Vayikra Perak Yud Zayin pasuk Dalid, and this pasuk is talking about slaughtering sacrifices outside the Beis Hamikdash, and yet and it says the full pasuk is dam. Where is it? Pasuk Dalid. The full pasuk is. Sorry, my. The El Pesach O Moed Lo Heviu. The person did not bring the korban to the Beis Hamikdash. Lahakriv korban la Hashem lifnei Mishkan Hashem, and it's in order to offer it in front of the Mishkan, in front of the sanctuary. Dam yechashev leishahu. It shall be considered blood for that person. Dam shafach. He has spilled blood. So why is there these references to blood? So Larabos Hazorek, it's coming to explicitly tell us that that the pasuk didn't need to talk about blood. The fact that it's talking about blood is to tell us that it also applies to somebody who throws blood. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That's what Rabbi Yishmael says. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Rabbi Akiva says no, that's not the source. The source is a different pasuk. O Zavach. It's from the fact that in Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin Pasuk Chet it says O Zavach. So O is an additional word, and a word that highlights the possibility that it includes something else. So Larabos as Hazorek, it comes to include somebody who throws. So let's take a look at Rashi. O Zavach. Ksiv Gabi Ha'ala. That word Ozavach is written in connection. This is second line in the widest lines of Rashi. It's written in connection with offering a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash. So there, L'Rabos says Zorek, it comes to include throwing. So Rabbi Yishmael. So now we have two lessons. Either it's from Dam Yechashev, that's Rabbi Yishmael's approach, and Rabbi Akiva says no, it's from Ozavach. So now the Gemara is going to go through what each of them do with the other person's psukim. So let's go through that. For Rabbi Yishmael, hi Ozavach, my avidle. What does he do with Ozavach? L'chalek, he uses it to separate, to categorize, as Rashi says, l'chalek. Next Rashi on that same second line. Delo tema ademasik ola ushlam. You don't have to bring both an ola and a shlamim, but rather if you were to bring either one individually, that is enough to cause a situation where you would be liable. The Rabbi Akiva l'chalik minole. So how does Rabbi Akiva know that you only have to bring one to be punished? Nafgale milo yivienu. Because it says that he's not going to bring it is singular, that shows that it's one item. As Rashi says, mash mechad. It implies just one. Rabbi Yishmael, so what does he do with lo yevienu? Hahumi boile al hashalem hu chayev, ve'enu chayev al hachaser. It teaches that you're only liable if you bring the entire item, and not if you bring something that's incomplete. Now we are going to see that completeness, it could refer, there are a couple of different possibilities as to what that means. So let's take a look at Rashi, who tells us what those could be.
What does Rashi mean? Mashmachad. One of what?
One of either an ola or a shlamim. It means one animal, one sacrifice. So now next Rashi, end of the second wide line of Rashi. Ve'eno chayiv, and now beginning in the third line, chayiv al chaser. Come on, pligi, we're going to have an argument. Ika lamanda amar al aver chaser. One opinion is going to say that when it says that you're only liable if you bring a whole thing, it means if you bring a limb that is missing. V'igalaman amar al behema chasera, that if you bring an animal and you're missing part of the animal, ad sheyila kol habehema, you had to bring the whole thing. V'igalaman amar al haktara chasera, it means that you have something missing from the burning. Kagon pachos mikazayas, that you're burning less than a kazayas. So one of those three things could be is what we mean when we say chaser. It could either mean that you're not referring to the whole animal, it could mean that you're not referring to a whole limb, or it could mean that you're not referring to a whole kazayas. For Rabbi Akiva, how does Rabbi Akiva get that liability for a non complete or lack of liability for a non-complete thing? Nafgalei mi lasot oto. Because it says oto, Rashi says, oto, shalem mashma. Oto implies that the thing is whole. Rabbi Yishmael, so what does Rabbi Yishmael do with lasot oto? Chad lemuktare finim. He needs, yes, you're right that it's also going to tell us about the wholeness, but he needs one time for us to learn about something where it was slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash and therefore is capable of being burned inside the Beis Hamikdash on the altar. And shechasru ve'elu b'chutz, and now you went and you brought up an incomplete amount of it outside, and that's also going to be not liable. And one is for where you would need to have burned it outside, namely if an animal was slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash. Both, whether you slaughter it inside or slaughter it outside, if you bring up outside the Beis Hamikdash only part of something, then you're not going to be liable. Tanya. And this is like we taught in a brisa. Rabbi Yishmael Omer Yachol. I might have thought Muktarei Finim Shechasru when it comes to things that should be burned inside the Beis Hamikdash, and you bring them up outside the Beis Hamikdash, and you bring them out up in a part. Ve'elan b'chutz, and now you bring up only part chayav that you will be liable. Talmud lasot oto. You have to do the whole thing. Ala shalem chayav ve'enu chayav ela chaser, and you're not going to be liable for the incomplete. Rabbi Akiva, what does Rabbi Akiva do with what Rabbi Akiva already is using lasot oto? So how does Rabbi Akiva learn this topic? Well, he disagrees with Rabbi Yishmael. Muktarei finim, when it comes to something that should be burned inside because it was slaughtered inside. Shechasru, if it's missing something, the helan b'chutz chayav. In that case, you are chayiv, and so as a result, he doesn't need to use both la'asot oto and lo yevienu in order to tell us that you're not liable for unless it's a complete thing, because he says that when it comes to something that could have been burned on an altar in the Beis Hamikdash, that you are liable even if it's incomplete. Okay, so as a result, we have now completed our understanding of how Rabbi Yishmael understands and deals with Rabbi Akiva's language of Ozavach. So now we go back. The Rabbi Akiva, hi dam yechashev ma'avidle. What does Rabbi Akiva do with dam yechashev? So l'rabo shchitas ha'of, he uses it to tell us that, you know what, not only animals, large animals where shechita is going to be a problem, but even a bird, because a bird still has blood. And so the blood is highlighting that even a bird you'll be subject to the prohibition of sacrificing an animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. V'Rabbi Yishmael nafgalei me o asher yishchat. And Rabbi Yishmael says, no, you learn the inclusion of birds from O. So the which obviously adds language, is an incorporative and a language that suggests an additional thing could be included. Rabbi Kiva Amar Lach, and Rabbi Kiva would say to you, Hahumi bai, we need the O there to tell us al hashochedu chayev, that one is liable for the shchita, the lo al hamolek, and not for the malika, because you might have thought that only if you did malika. After all, malika is the way that you sacrifice a bird inside the Beis Hamikdash, and so I would think that for sure you should be chayev if you do malika on a bird outside the Beis Hamikdash in order to bring it up as a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash. For Rabbi Yishmael nafgalei mizeh hadavar, and Rabbi Yishmael learns that exclusion, the fact that you're not going to be liable for malika, from the fact we say zeh hadavar. That is the restricting. Titania, and we have this all detailed in a brisa. Asher yishchat ein liela shoche behema. When it says, when the Torah says Asher yishchat, we know that it's telling us that you're not allowed to slaughter a large animal for a sacrifice outside the base of Migdash. Shachat of minalan. How do I know about a bird? Talmud lomar o asher yishchat. Exactly as we just saw Rabbi Yishmael say. Yachol af hamolek. I might have think that this is even telling us that Malika outside the Beis Hamikdash is going to be Vidinhu, and in fact, you could make a logical argument to say that that's the case. Mashchita de ein derech hashkshera bifnim chayev Malika shederech hashera bifnim eino din shu chayev. Given the fact that shchita doesn't work in the Beis Hamikdash, and yet you're liable if you do it outside the Beis Hamikdash, Malika, which does work in the Beis Hamikdash, it should certainly make you liable outside the Beis Hamikdash. Talmud lomar zeh davar. That's why it says zeh davar, and so that is the whole lesson of Rabbi Yishmael. So we got the total evidence of that. Rabbi Akiva Amar Lach. And what Rabbi Akiva would say, well, what do you do with zeh davar? Hahumi boy l'gzeira shava. He needs it for a Gzeira Shava. Now, the Gemara does not tell us what that Gzeira Shava is, but the Gzeira Shava is detailed, excuse me, in both Bab Basra and Nedarim, and it's talking about the concept of the fact that you don't need to have expert court to nullify an individual's oaths. Rather, a three-Jew panel, which is, of course, what we do when we do a Taras Nedarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We do a Hataras Nedarim, and so that Hataras Nedarim is going to cover us for even though we don't have expert judges, it's still a valid Hatarat Nedarim. Okay, so now, and we've resolved everything because everybody has learned something from everything, and we've got everything covered. And so now, what about the following? We have on a Mishnah on Kuf Yud Bet Amud Bet that it's going to say that if you do Kamitza or you receive the blood, you're not liable outside the Beis Hamikdash for doing those items. Minalan, how do I know that? Well, in second, how do you know that you're going to be liable? If the Torah never has a prohibition, why would I think that you would be liable? Tesi mishchita. You could learn it from slaughtering. Mashla shchita, just as when it comes to slaughtering, shekain poselis, shalola ochlin bepesach, that when you slaughter something, it invalidates it on Pesach if you were to do it for the wrong people. And so, I'm sorry. So this is the answer. The answer is you want to try and learn it from shchita? You can't learn it from shchita. Ma shchita shekain poselis shalola ochlen bepesach. Shchita has a restriction that doesn't apply to either kamitza or receiving blood. Namely, that when it comes to a korban pesach, if you offer it for those who are not the people who are supposed to be participating in it, then it makes it not kosher. But that's not true with respect to kamitza or with respect to receiving blood. Those don't have any concept of having a group and thinking about somebody wrong. So Tesi Mizrika. All right, so let's learn it from throwing of the blood. No, Ma'al Zrika Shekain Zar Chayav Aleha Misa. No, when you have Zrika, that is going to be, has a stricture that's associated with it, because if a non-Kohen does it, they are subject to the death penalty from heaven. As Rashi tells us, Shekain Zar Chayav Aleha Misa, last Rashi on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, Masha Ein Kain B'Kamitza, the Kabbalah, that when it comes to Kamitza and receiving the blood, that's not true. The Inan Avoda Tama, because you need to have a complete service. You need to be doing something that's a final step in the service in order to be subject to the death penalty. Below avoda sheyesh achareha avoda, and not a service that has a service afterwards. Keda amrin perak berishona b'seder yoma, as we saw back on Daf Kav Daled Amud Aleph in Maseches Yoma, v'hani tarvayu yesh achareha avoda, and when it comes to both kamitza and receiving the blood, there's further services that are associated with it. The kamitza, you have to put the kamitza into a klisha race, and then you have to put it up on the altar, and the blood that you receive needs to be thrown. So those have services after them. Well, Tesimi Benayu. So maybe we could learn from the two of them together. Meaning, as Rashi says, Mishchita v'zrika. We can learn from Shchita and Zrika. To keep Harakta Mala Shchita Shekain Poselis L'Shalo L'Shem Ochlin, because you asked what about the fact that when it comes to Shchita, it's going to puzzle if you have in mind those who are not going to eat it. But Pesach, when it comes to the Korban Pesach, Zrika Tokriach. Well, you could use the throwing of the blood to undermine that question. Umala Zrika Shekain Zar Chayav Aleha, and you're going to ask, well, what about Zrika? It has a liability for a non-Kohen, Allah Misa, that you're going to be liable to the death penalty, not from man, but from heaven. Shchita tochiach. Well, shchita shows that that's not true. And v'chazar adin, and we can use again the two. We end up with a tzara shava shebehen, and you end up with a tzara shava. Shehein avoda, they are both services. V'chayavin alehem b'chutz, and you are going to be liable if you do them outside the base of Mikdash. Afania v'kamitza, so to kamitza, v'kabbalah, and receiving the blood. Shehein avoda v'yischayv alehem b'chutz, you should be liable if you do them outside. No, im kain, if you were right that in fact that you could do this tzara shava, lo yomar bezrika, the Torah would not even need to tell us that throwing the blood outside is a problem. V'tesim b'benaya, and you would be able to learn it just from slaughtering and offering up, and which we already have as prohibitions. So we wouldn't need a separate pasuk to tell us about zrika. So and the logic would be as follows: V'tesi mishchita, you could learn. First, we would try to learn it from shchita, but then we would say you can't learn it from shchita because mala shchita shekain posela shalol l'shem ochlim b'pesach. Well, then it's got the limitation about Pesach. Tesi mahala. So then we'd say, okay, so learn it up from offering the sacrifice on the altar. So malahala shekain yeshna b'mincha. Well, ha'ala applies to mincha offerings as well, and so that's a restriction that applies that isn't relevant to throwing blood. So the Tesi b'Manaya. So as a result, we could learn it from the two of them together. So and yet we don't do that. So lahachik siv kra. So why is it that the Torah specifically tells us that throwing blood is going to be problematic? Lemeimar delo asam b'Manaya. It's to tell us that you can't learn it from this tzad hashava. So the Gemara above, so now we can't learn it from and as a result, we can't learn kamitza or the receiving of blood from outside that's a prohibition that you'd be liable if you do it outside the base of Migdash from the tzad hashava. As a result, there's no possibility of learning it from anywhere, and therefore that's why the Torah, the Mishnah on Kuf Yud Bet Amabet is going to tell us that you're not liable at all. So Amar Rabbi Abahu Shachat V'Zarak L'Divrei Rabbi Yishmael Chayev Achas L'Divrei Rabbi Akiva Chayev Shtayim. So above, the Gemara told us the michlokus between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva as to what is the source for throwing sacrificial blood outside the base of Migdash. So for Rabbi Yishmael, it is a pasuk in connection. Let's go back and just take a look at it. It's a pasuk that is dam yechashev, and this is again a pasuk about slaughtering sacrifices outside. So the dam prohibition is connected to the slaughtering of sacrifices outside. And Rabbi Akiva says it's ozavach, which is it's from the O, which is in a pasuk associated with offering sacrifices outside. So according to Rabbi Abahu, if you slaughter it and you throw the blood, well, that is all part of the same prohibition according to Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael, you're only chayiv one prohibition. Rabbi Akiva chayiv shtayim, but for Rabbi Akiva, you'd be liable to two. And Abaye disagrees. Abaye Amar Afilu Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Even Rabbi Akiva could say that you're only liable once because Eino Chayev Ela Achas. To Amar Kra Sham Taaseh. There you shall do it. Hakazuv Asan Lekulan Avoda Achat. So the Torah is telling us that it's all as if it's one service. So what about Zarak Vehela? When it comes to and now this is Rabbi Abahu continuing his opinion. When it comes to Zarak V'Hala, throwing and bringing up, well now, L'divrei Rabbi Shmuel chayav shtayim, L'divrei Rabbi Akiva, einu chayav ela achas. According to Rabbi Akiva, you would be chayav once because he learned Zarak from He'ela, and so as a result, it's all part of the same prohibition. So Abaye Amar, afilu L'divrei Rabbi Akiva chayav shtayim. No, actually, when it comes to throwing and bringing up, even Rabbi Akiva could say you're liable to two. Lahachi plignehu palkinu kra. And this is why the Torah separated. Sham ta'aleh v'sham ta'aseh. Meaning, if you do any aliyah action, meaning the bringing the sacrifice on top of the altar, that is one action. V'sham ta'aseh, any other action is also going to trigger liability. So shachab v'zarok v'hela l'divrei hakol chayav shtayim. According, Rabbi Abau concludes though that if you do all three, well then certainly you're going to be liable twice. And you're going to only be liable twice, and everybody's going to agree that you're going to be liable twice because obviously each of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva learn the throwing from either the slaughtering or the bringing up, and so as a result, you're going to be liable twice because you've done both the bringing up and the slaughtering. Okay, so the Gemara now quotes a brisa that defines what is deemed outside in connection with the liability for sacrificing. Meaning, how far outside the Beis Hamikdash do you need to get? Because I might think that you need to get outside even Yerushalayim. So Tana Rabbanan b'Machaneh, the Torah tells us that when this is a pasuk that says that if you're going to slaughter an ox, a sheep, or a goat, you have to do so in the camp. Yachal hashochet ola b'darom yechayev. I might think that if you're slaughtering it, that when it comes to in the camp, it means anywhere you're not supposed to. And so as a result, maybe if you slaughter an ola in the south, you should be liable for slaughtering it as if you're outside the place where you're supposed to slaughter it, because you're not slaughtering it in the north. And therefore, it should be subject to the same prohibition as if you slaughtered it outside the entire Beis Hamikdash. Talmud Lomar, michutz lamachaneh. No, the Torah specifically says that we're dealing with slaughtering it outside the camp. That's right, because it says in that same pasuk, michutz lamachaneh. So imichutz lamachaneh, yachal chutz l'shlosh machanot. In seconds, if it says outside the camp, maybe it means to be outside all three camps. So you'd have to be outside even all of Yerushalayim. So, minayin af b'machaneh leviyah. How do I know that even in the Levite camp you are going to be liable? Talmud Lomar b'machaneh. That's why it said specifically b'machaneh, the word that we started with. Well, even machaneh yachol hashochet ola b'darom yechayev. Well, again, back to our original question. Maybe you should be liable if you slaughter an ola, which is supposed to be slaughtered in the north, and you slaughter it in the south of the courtyard. So you're still in the Beis Hamikdash, but you're not in the right place. Talmud Lomar. Oh, asher yishchat michutz lamachaneh, or if you were to slaughter it outside the camp. So that teaches us machutz lamachaneh miyuchad she'ein roi l'shchitas kol zebach. Just as slaughtering outside the camp is unique in that it's not fit for slaughtering any sacrifices. So af b'machaneh she'ein roi l'shchitas kol zebach. Similarly, when we say b'machaneh, it means not in a place that's not fit for any sacrifice at all. Yatza darom, that comes to exclude the south. Sha'af al pi she'ein roi l'shchitas kodesh kodshim. Even though you're not supposed to slaughter kodesh kodshim there, roi l'shchitas kodshim kalim. It's fit for slaughtering kodshim kalim. So Amar Ula Hashochet al Gago Shel Heichal Chayav. If you slaughter on the roof of the Beis Hamikdash and the roof of the structure, so then you're going to be liable. Maybe because you're not, that's a place that's not fit for slaughtering any sacrifices. So Maskif lo Rava says, I have a question on that. Im kain nichtov kra b'machaneh u michutz l'machaneh. Then the Torah would only need to say b'machaneh and michutz l'machaneh. V'lo boy el pesach o moed. It wouldn't need that you need to also say that you need to bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting. That's and by the way, that pasuk ends that he did not bring it there. So why does it also say that he didn't bring it there? El Pesach Oel Moed Lamali. Why do I need that? Lav Lemeute Gago. Isn't it coming to tell us that in fact that even the roof is an okay place to slaughter it, meaning that you're not liable for doing it on the roof? Ula Rava. And with second, and according to Rava, Im Kain Nichtov El Pesach Oel Moed. Let it just write El Pesach Moel Moed. Why do I need b'machaneh u'michutz l'machaneh lamali? Why do I need that? Lav la'asuye gago. Maybe you should use the exact opposite argument and say that we could just say El Pesach Oel Moed, and the fact that we say b'machaneh and michutz l'machaneh is telling you that you're specifically liable for the roof. So Amar Rav Mari, no, lo atuye kula bifnim v'tzavara b'chutz. No, what it's coming when we have the words machaneh and mechutz l'machaneh, it's coming to tell us that if you have the body inside the Beis Hamikdash and the neck is outside the Beis Hamikdash, you're going to be liable for slaughtering outside the Beis Hamikdash. V'tzavara b'chutz pshita. 1 second. That can't be what Rav Murray said. That's obvious that you're going to be liable because you actually did the slaughtering outside. Amai kapid rachmana. What was the Torah worried about? Ashchita ushchita b'chutzu. Hey, the Torah is focused on shchita, and this is slaughtering outside the Beis Hamikdash. No, it's the opposite. What he meant to say is that if the entire animal is outside the Beis Hamikdash and the neck is inside the Beis Hamikdash, that's where it's going to be liable. So that's why Rava needs that language. And so Rava is asking on Ula and saying, no, according to this, we have extra language. Therefore, it must be that even if you were to do it on the Gag, it would not be prohibited. Itmar hamala bisman hazeh. What about if you were to bring it in this time? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayav, Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Rabbi Yochanan says you're going to be liable. Reish Lakish says you're not. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayav Kedusha Rishona Kitchela Shaita Bekitchela Asadlavo. Rabbi Yochanan says you're liable for bringing a sacrifice now because the sanctity that the Beis Hamikdash got was a sanctity for all time. Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Reish Lakish says you're not liable. Kedusha Rishona Kitchela Shaita Below Kitchela Asadlavo. That the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash is not a Kedusha for all time, and therefore you would not be liable today. Nema de Beplukta Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yoshua. Maybe they're arguing just like Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. It's not Amar Rabbi Eliezer Kishahayu Bonim Behecha when they were building the second Beis Hamikdash. Hayu Osin Kalayim Behecha. They would set up curtains where the walls would be. Kalayim Ba'azaros and Kalayim in the courtyards in order to serve as walls. In the sanctuary, they would build the wall outside the curtains, and in the courtyard, they would build the walls on the inside of the curtains. So I'm Rabbi Yeshua, Shamati Shahayu Makribin Alpi Afalpi She'ain Bias. They brought sacrifices, even there was no house at all, even if there were no curtains whatsoever. And they would eat kachim kachim even when there were no curtains. So kachim kalim u'ma'aser sheni afal pi she'ein choma, and they would eat the kachim kalim and the ma'aser sheni even though there was no wall around it. It's because the Beis Hamikdash was sanctified for all times. So lav maklal the Rabbi Eliezer savar lo kitcha. Isn't that implying that Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says that it wasn't for all time? So no, not necessarily. Amrle Ravina Ravashi, Mimai, what basis do you have to do that? Maybe everybody says that the Beis Hamikdash was sanctified for all times. Umar, my deshmiya Amar, Umar, my deshmiya Amar. And each of them are just reporting what they heard as to how the reconstruction happened. And if you ask, well, why did they need those curtains? It's in order to not have everybody be able to see into the Beis Hamikdash and see what was happening. And so it was for some sense of privacy. So that is the first of a number of disputes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan in connection with offering sacrifices outside the Beis Hamikdash. That first one was about offering sacrifices today. For another one, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf, and looking forward to continuing our learning together. Again, tomorrow we will be Zoom only. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a great day.
I have a question.
Sure.
Despite the fact that it's very clear that eventually we get it very clear that it is in a right to bring sacrifices outside the Beit HaMikdash. During sepulchral times, there were at least two temples, for lack of a better term, built in Egypt.
Yeah, so the Gemara talks about whether or not those were good things or bad things, and my understanding of those Gemaras is that it's not, and those were not considered necessarily good things and not considered valid actions. But of course, those were early, and so remember that there is this debate. So the question of whether or not at some point there clearly was a debate about Kitchud La'asad Lavo or not. So
the first one was early. That was in Elephantine near Aswan. But the second one was much later, the Temple of Onias, which is discussed in the Gemara somewhat. And that one lasted a very long time. I think it actually outlasted the second Beit HaMikdash.
I did not remember that in particular. But my understanding of the Gemaras that are associated with it is that the vast majority of opinions say that they were not doing the right thing.
Yes, absolutely. But it's not even mentioned in these sugyas we have here.
Yes, it is interesting but what you're saying is it's interesting that nobody's bringing that as an evidentiary point in order to highlight. Well, I don't think this is necessarily the primary sugya for this topic. This language that I think we just quoted, I'm pretty sure appears elsewhere in the Gemara. So I don't think that, again, I don't think that this is the primary sugya of
Yeah.
Kutcher Rishona Kitchelas Shaita of Kitchelas Labo. So that would be my best explanation for why that wasn't brought here. All right. Enjoy. Have a great day. See you all tomorrow.